Hello everyone and welcome to today's SANS webcast, Reducing Attacks and Improving Resiliency, the SANS 2017 Threat Hunting Survey Results, Part 2, sponsored by Anomaly, Domain Tools, Malwarebytes, Rapid7, Squirrel Data, and Threat Connect. My name is Carol Auth of the SANS Institute and I will be moderating today's webcast. Today's featured speakers are Robert M. Lee, SANS Certified Instructor and Course Author. Tony Gidwani, Director of Research Operations at Threat Connect. Mike Scott, Managed Detection and Response Service at Rapid7. And Dana Torgerson, Product Manager at Malwarebytes. If during the webcast you have any questions for our presenters, please enter them into the questions window located on the GoToWebinar interface. We will be answering them during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Please note that this webcast is being recorded and a copy of the slides and recording of this webcast will be available for viewing later today and can be found on the SANS registration page. And with that, I'd like to hand the webcast over to Robert.
Hey, thanks so much, Carol. So appreciate everybody dialing in today and joining us as we go through the second part of the threat hunting survey from this year. The first part had Rob Lee and our sponsors covering everything with a theme of Westworld. So for those of you who know the other Rob Lee at SANS, always loves doing sort of a themed approach. So I wanted to get in on it, but I took the approach of Dread. So you're going to see a lot of Dread throughout the theme today. Not that old Sylvester Stallone movie that really just sucks, but the new one, the better one. And really the reason I chose this is because a lot of the focus of threat hunting, as it was revealed through the survey, as well as for those of us that have been in this industry a while and understand this topic, the focus is really around that human and really the human process and the strategy we employ. And that was evident this year in the results as we asked folks and said, what is it that drives value for you about hunting? Do you derive value in hunting? And really, what is those keys to success that you have? So in the second part of the survey, that's really what we're going into is that value and the strategy behind it to make sure that you can measure the success. Because, of course, if we're not measuring anything, then we're just doing nebulous activity that may or may not return value to the organization. But if we actually can measure our successes and show where we as an organization are improving, especially along things like processes and data collection and analysis, that is where we can derive value and show folks and show our organizations why they're investing in this hunting focus. So that's my big message at the beginning of the presentation here to everybody is I want you to become the law, right? Take that judge dread approach. Maybe not judge, jury, and executioner per se for the themes of the movie, but definitely the focus of feeling empowered and going through the organization looking for the bad guys. I often find that when I talk to teams that come through our classes at SANS, I usually get a lot of folks that are empowered and doing some awesome things, but there's always that portion of the community that feels that they can't do the things they need to at work, that there's various challenges that they run into on a day-to-day basis. Maybe they can't even request certain types of data for various sensitivity reasons, or maybe legal's gotten too far involved in investigations, or maybe even just stovepipes that form around our organization. Those are things that we need to combat against. Really, if we wanted to have a true hunting approach, and we really want to, again, feel that empowerment to go through their organizations and find bad guys and make our organizations better, we really do need to make sure that our human defenders feel that they're the empowered individuals able to operate in a way that makes our organizations better. So let's get into it. Just to start off again with that theme going through Mega City 1 here, basically the principle for anybody who hasn't seen the movie is that post-apocalyptic world, as any given good sci-fi might be, we have these large cities that are forming centralized populations, and they have a ton of different little silos of excellence, right? We've got these major apartment complexes where people live out their entire lives and really don't even see others in those different silos. I thought this was clever imagery for the challenges that we see in enterprises today, where you'll have good security teams operating, but not as one team. You might have a security operations center, but does that security operations center integrate with incident response? For some, it's part of the same SOC. For others, not so much. For some organizations that are particularly large, they have multiple security operations centers for different product lines or different business units. And we start to see a disconnect form between these teams. We often see, Intel teams sitting outside of the folks managing and going through the incidents. All of these things create those silos of excellence where individually, sure, there's value in what they're doing for the organization, but could be a lot more value as folks are working together. So that's the theme I wanted to start us off on, because this to me is what hunting is about. It's recognizing that between those silos of excellence where we're supposed to have a certain amount of coverage, there's gaps, there's seams, right? There's opportunities for us to start bridging together those work functions, to start to bridge together data collection and analysis, and make sure that we're seeing all the little stuff going on in between, because those are opportunities for adversaries, right? If a Intel team is sitting outside the Security Operations Center and not talking whatsoever to them, and they're spending their entire day playing around with OSINT because they can't get intrusion analysis, obviously they're not going to drive the most value for the organization possible. In the same way that incident responders who aren't queued up to what the enterprise security teams are doing. Maybe the web proxy and firewall groups aren't actually integrated into the overall intrusions that the company is working outside of their one view. That's what we want to address. That's the human process to make sure that we have an understandable approach to finding out those adversaries. So let's start off with the first big question that came out of the survey in the part 2, which really was around how folks are deriving value. So we asked the audience, and I feel a little bit, kind of a survey says here, but we asked the audience very cleanly, what are you doing in terms of value? What are the improvements you're seeing? And really just right up front, are you deriving value at all? And so we had 60% of the respondents tell us that they did have measurable improvement from hunting. So when I first saw that, I was interested. I was like, okay, 60%, that's good. Majority of organizations are deriving value, but is it the rest are not deriving value, or what might be at play there? And so as you dig into it, 36% of our respondents said that they just were unsure. And I would say that that's a natural thing, and I understand being in a position where maybe organizational procedures or cultural issues or maybe just a lack of strategy has led to being unsure of what value you're returning. But I would say that is where wrong lives, right? And I don't want to ever color anybody or anybody's organization as doing wrong things, but some people are, right? And so I would say that if you understand the value that you're deriving, you can fall into either we are giving measurable improvement or we're not. Both of those are good answers. Figuring out that you're doing something that's not driving value to the organization is a great takeaway. But being in that middle category and saying, you know what, I just have no idea, that's a challenge, and that's the area that I would focus folks on actually addressing. We saw some awesome opportunities, though, across the different table 2 here where folks are saying, look, we were getting a lot better in terms of speed and accuracy. So the table values are from those that did derive value, that 60%. How many of them were driving value along some checklist items here, like speed and accuracy, attack surface exposure, maybe finding some of those seams in the organization that represent gaps of knowledge. Things like, you'll notice down towards the bottom, reducing frequency of malware infections, exposure to external threats, maybe even amount of actual breaches. It doesn't seem to be the sweet spots, and I'm actually pretty excited about that, because I would say that those aren't necessarily the purpose of hunting. The number one goal of hunting, in my opinion, and this was really echoed at the Threat Hunting Summit that occurred a couple weeks ago in New Orleans, the big value of hunting is not actually finding threats. Now, that seems crazy, but I'll back up the statement here. Finding threats is great, right? It can be great. Sometimes it's not always that great when you figure out you're compromised by a major intrusion and have been for a while. But generally speaking, the idea of hunting for threats, that's what hunting's all about, right? Well, I would say that if your only goal is to find threats or reduce malware infections, you're letting the adversary drive your metrics, right? You're letting their interaction with you determine if your processes are actually valuable to the organization. Instead, I would say look to improve your processes. Look to make sure that teams are working together, finding those gaps in the organization and closing them. That's the value that I want to see returned. So I'm going to actually open it up to our sponsors and the folks that are on the call today. Some folks that you probably have seen before at the various SANS events, so friendly faces indeed. And I'll just go down the line here and ask, in terms of what you're seeing from your customers and what you're seeing from your own expertise, is things like attack exposure, is that a common metric, or are there other better metrics or other ways to derive value? And Tony, I'm going to end up starting off with you, and then Dana, and then we'll get back to Mike. So Tony, if you could start us off, what are you seeing in terms of deriving value and really the metrics behind that?
That's a great question, and it's a tough one that I think a lot of our teams and users really struggle with. I think speed and accuracy is really a big one, but it's really more that shift in mindset that you alluded to, whereby adopting the mindset of a potential attacker, and you start to see the seams in your own organization differently. Our customers are able then to point to, what was a potentially intelligence-initiated approach that allowed them to see something, create a change in their organization or their processes, that either mitigated that seam. Sometimes they can quantify that with fewer attacks, but other times it's, it kind of stands on its own that by making these changes, their network becomes more defensible.
Oh, that's awesome. Perfect answer in my opinion. Of course, they're all good answers, right? No wrong answer, but I agree, Tony. All right, so Dana, what you got?
Hey, thanks, Robert, too, for having us. I appreciate that. I'm thinking that there's so much attack surface out there in your businesses. It just feels like you'd be measuring a moving target. I mean, I'd say investing in tools and technology that continuously capture and aggregate and display threats that you've been detecting in your environment, so then you can actually have an accurate baseline to measure your threat hunting effectiveness against. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. You're thinking, well, that's exactly what my SIM does, or my endpoint management platform. That's what it's showing me, and you would be right. It can, but it's limited by the effectiveness and the accuracy or the certainty of the detections your other tools have fed into it. So I'm talking about improved detection capabilities as well as extending the value of the stuff you've already invested well in and gaining that better threat visibility. I think that in your scoping and hunting efforts, I think that's the best measurement you could be able to track.
No, spot on. So I think that's a perfect approach in saying, look, you've got a lot of tools in your organization today. You're viewing the world through those tools probably, but you've got gaps. Guaranteed, just has to naturally occur that there are gaps. How do we actually improve that detection, realizing there are gaps and finding those gaps to close that? So that's, yeah, absolutely perfect. So Mike, what else?
My view is a little different as a managed service provider. When clients are coming to us and outsourcing this type of activity, what they're mostly focused on is one, ensuring that if they're breached, they know about it, and secondly, ensuring that the likelihood of them being breached is as little as possible. So when we're providing them metrics for the success of our hunt activities, we're mostly focused around attack surface reduction. So both identifying anomalies that may indicate a lack of secure processes, but also looking at data coming back from the various logs and endpoints and what have you, and determining if there are vulnerabilities that they should be patching. So mostly we're going to them and saying, we have a particular percentage decrease in your attack surface and these high-risk vulnerabilities, and we also see processes you can show to ensure that if you are breached, you don't have an adversary running through your network quickly.
No, that's totally fair, though, especially from a managed service perspective. It's going to be different outputs, right? So we have a enterprise security team that is doing their job on a day-to-day basis and are trying to find value. It is going to be a different value proposition than an MSSP type structure. I think that's totally fair, especially from the idea that, if you look at Rapid7 as an example and a long history around the vulnerability community and doing a lot of great work there, I would expect that to be an output that people just naturally expect from coming to you guys as well. So it's entirely fair to derive different value especially from different approaches. So rock on. All right, perfect. So let's keep moving then. I would note that when we get to really talking about when are we ready to hunt, when is an organization actually hunting appropriately, one of the big things to understand is, do we have a defensible environment? Do we have an opportunity to hunt? So I don't like organizations, personally, as much as I love Intel and I love hunting, and I think they're just awesome fields, I always caution my students that, look, if you don't have change control, if you don't have a patch management policy, if you don't have logs more than 30 days in your environment, hunting might not be the right approach for you. It is very likely not going to return the investment that you are seeking right now, because you've got things to improve, right? You've got to build that defensible environment, especially with hunting being the focus on humans. We want to put them in an environment they can excel in. So one of the questions that we asked in the survey was around, what was the previously, detected threats? Did you have threats that you found that your tools were catching and you just didn't see it because you didn't investigate it? Did you have threats that were unknown to your organization that you started seeing by actually going through and hunting? Were they just evolved threats from previous, engagements you've had with the adversary and their capabilities before? And one of the things that I would say we've got to work on as a community is 30% of the respondents came back and said, I have no idea. And across each one of these different categories, we had a large portion of folks that just said, I don't know if we've seen this before. I don't know if this has been interacting with our environments before, if it's an evolved case. Just do not understand. And that, to me, really speaks to a lack of knowledge around our environments and in face of the adversaries. So, again, it's all about building that defensible environment to make sure that we can say with confidence, you know what, we are actually seeing improvements in new discovery techniques, new hypothesis testing techniques, things that are finding those gaps in our organization. But if we do find threats, we should have that visibility to say, look, we've seen this before, or this is entirely new and worth our time to investigate. So I gave a recommendation in the paper that came out with this survey to say, look, aim for 15% or less. I'm not looking for organizations that have 100% clarity into their threat landscape and themselves in the face of it. That's not reasonable. But I would definitely aim to try to get that 15% or less, that if you work an intrusion, you work some sort of incident in your environment, that 80+% of the time, really 85% of the time, you have an understanding of what it is that you're seeing. And that really just speaks to even sort of the threat intelligence community and understanding what's active in the world and again, what's active in your environment. But if you're finding that you do have above 15% where you just don't know what's going on, you might find that some of those passive defenses in your organization, firewalls, AV, endpoint security solutions, any of the technologies and tools that are doing awesome things for us on a day-to-day basis, those passive defenses, they might require some tuning. It might require some extra love and care to make sure that, again, we have that defensible environment. But it's really the humans, again, and this is reinforced throughout our survey this time, it's the humans that are moving a defensible environment to a defended one. I remember a point in my career where I was given millions of IP-connected devices in terms of the Security Operations Center's responsibility, and told, find the nation states that we're not tracking yet. Find the APT actors in our environment. I'm like, okay, where's a network map? We don't have one. Okay. How much log retention do we have? We really don't know that for sure. We started going down the list, and at a point when you've got 5, 6, 7 million IP-connected devices in a random topology, everything looks like China after a while, right? So you're not exactly getting to a real good view of what's going on in your environment if you just randomly are plopped down and told, make magic happen. So my general recommendation, I don't want to dive into it too much in this, but my general recommendation for those people that are looking to move their organizations along, I linked the SANS paper down here at the bottom that talks about the sliding scale of cybersecurity and saying, look, let's realize the values on the left-hand side of the scale and try to understand how we can start driving that value to get our architecture in right places. When Mike's talking about attack surface reduction, can a byproduct of good hunting be that? Absolutely. Let's make sure that we understand our architecture and the things that's opening up in terms of the risk that we have. From a passive defense perspective and the endpoint solutions and understanding malicious capabilities. That's where Dana and Malwarebytes and folks are focusing on making sure that we take the adversary's capabilities and understand them well enough to increase our defenses, and then drive that knowledge into what I would consider that active defense, which is really where the hunting takes place. That human focus of responding to intrusions, analyzing them, taking that defensible environment to a defended one. But we've also got to always be careful of driving intelligence into our processes and making sure that we have a lot of visibility right? If you want to get that 30% down to closer to 15%, you're going to need to understand what's going on in the larger community. That's where I'd say Tony and Threat Connect and the different teams out there that are focusing on understanding the threat landscape. That's that key component to what we're doing. And then in the paper, you'll note when I say offense, I say that technically it can contribute somewhat to security, so it's listable. But I always encourage people not to go that direction. And the whole point of the paper, actually, when it was published, was to say that it's such a bad choice in general from return on investment. The value's on the left-hand side of the scale. Build your defensible organization, move to the right, and start adding on humans to make sure that you take it to a defended position. So undoubtedly, those proactive approaches are working, right? People are finding the value in the survey in the hunting techniques that they're doing. We saw that in the survey. We understand now in this discussion moving from defensible to defended, but what are some metrics to even measure ourselves on? Well, first of all, one of the questions in the survey was trying to determine, how much better are you in the key areas that you find, such as response. And we found that over 50% of organizations, when they went hunting, they detected and responded to serious threats. I'm not talking just some dry X infection, but serious threats in the organization in under 24 hours. That is insane. I love to see that. That is exciting. That somebody taking the proactive approach detected and responded in under 24 hours. That is awesome to see. I mean, I'm used to the numbers from the reports that come out of, hey, it's 6 months until someone realizes they've actually been infected, and the industry metrics that some are even 365 days into it, and kind of this ho-hum defeatist attitude. But here we started seeing the folks that are taking that proactive approach really driving value. Around 12% said they detected and responded within 1 hour. That is, I'm interested in some of those best practices because that is awesome. So, again, I wouldn't hold your organization up to this. If you are just getting started, you're looking to move from a defensible to a defended environment, you're looking to embrace hunting, I don't expect you to get within 1 hour, but it's attainable. And that's the important thing to note, that there are organizations that are doing it, and you too can do that. So I would just say this blasts away those industry averages, and it's very exciting to see, and especially for a focus on empowering those human defenders against human threats, because that's really what we're talking about, right? It's not malware is the threat, it's the human is the threat, and malware is just their capability. So as we move along as well, we saw a big focus on people, process, and technology in the survey. A lot of people really embracing their role as hunters in the organization, and we do see people driving new investment in this space. So 65% of our respondents said, hey, we are going to be increasing our investment in hunting over the next 24 months. So of those choices, what do we see? Well, number one was the ability to search through data and information. We all have tons of data. Trying to figure out which ones are most important to us and where and why, that's a key focus area for a lot of people. In the same way, trying to just find the patterns. How do we connect the dots between tons of different sets of information? Do I have a view of logs and network captures? Great. Well, do I also have views into my physical security teams to say that there was weird events going on at an unmanned site, or somebody was getting in, access badges when they weren't supposed to, and then later on I saw weird activity on the network. Are we connecting different and disparate sets of information? And of course, the last really big investment area for folks was more people. Better staff, more staff with investigative skills. And this is a theme I'm seeing from the SANS class perspective. Obviously, we are a little bit biased in the sense we see a lot of people who are obviously interested in training, but see a lot of focus on people that say, look, I'm a web proxy log analyst, but I still want to come to the threat intel class, or I still want to go to the incident response class. I want to understand more about the bigger picture, so I have these investigative skills. And I'm seeing that as a pattern where the old ways of you have one job and do it well are kind of blending away, where we're saying, look, we need more well-rounded analysts and that are able to do the performing actions such as the data correlation and pattern finding. So I'm going to open it up to the audience. This time I'm going to sort of reverse it and go Mike, Dana, Tony, and just talk about, obviously a big focus on people and process, and the people that use your technologies, right? So that can integrate with the MSSP correctly and use that value, that can integrate with, Threat Connect and Malwarebytes and use the technologies correctly. What are some of those tips you have for organization around finding and training and hiring and maintaining those right people that can take these tools and things and take us really to the position where we are hunting and moving our organizations forward? So Mike wants to start us off.
Sure. When it comes to hiring for the hunting skill set, I have a kind of a strange approach. Obviously, I want to look for candidates who have the technical expertise to understand the underlying systems they'll be interacting with, but more so, as it's a bit of a rare skill set, what I tend to look for are a few key attributes of personality. So I really, as I'm asking questions, technical questions, I'm looking for critical thinking skills. So I'll ask, questions that are a little more in depth from a technical perspective and just see where the candidate goes, what their thought processes look like, whether they're right or wrong, and have them explain to me why they made the decision they did or what their steps were. And what I'm looking for there is when they're presented with something new, say in threat hunting they see a new piece of evidence on an endpoint, or they see some weird network request in a web proxy, I want to see what that critical thinking and innate curiosity actually does for them. So do they pull on that thread, follow breadcrumbs, and really figure out why that happened, which is integral to the capability to really understand what you're doing with hunting, or do they just kind of give up or say, hey, this doesn't really look like something I'm familiar with, so I'm just going to skip it. Furthermore, I tend to look for generalized skill sets in IT, really. I personally came from a sysadmin background, and that helped me quite a bit as I understood the operating systems I was looking at and what types of traffic and what ran on them, as well as a lot of the enterprise technologies that were out there, from infrastructure, email, and web proxies and firewalls. And that baseline knowledge really helps my team be able to understand what's happening in all of our customer networks. So going back to that, critical thinking, curiosity, technical skills, and really the ability to learn.
Awesome. So we are hiring unicorns. No, those are
pretty
all
much.
Skills.
Yeah.
Those are all good things. They can be hard to find, though, for sure. So Dana, help us out in understanding. You want to hire those type of people. I think we can all echo those type of people are what we want to hire. But how do you make those people? How do you help those people develop?
I agree with what Mike just said 100%. He's spot on. So I'll just sum it up for the audience. For those your directors, your managers, VPs in your security org right now, hire folks with SANS certifications. I mean, this should be obvious.
we didn't pay you to say that.
No, it's shameless. I get it. Think about it. SANS training is intensive. It's comprehensive. It's respected, and more, it's being desirable by employers. In fact, heck, I just hired someone last week, and I was actively looking across all the candidates' resumes and LinkedIn profiles to see if they had SANS training, or better yet, GISE certs. And so getting those experienced security or threat analysts who can actually demonstrate, the actions and the results that they experienced in their previous companies, that should be a minimum requirement for hiring managers. But then seeing how they applied their training at, let's say, 2 or more businesses within the same industry, or with the same amount of attack surface as your company has, that would be ideal.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. And I really appreciate the kind words as well. So Tony, we've heard hire really good people that have the core skills, especially that passion and intuition. We've heard looking for people that have demonstrated they're willing to go above and beyond and maybe go to training and have had experience in organizations. Talk to me about the rest of folks. Stop talking about the new people. Obviously, we want to bring new people into our organizations as well that have never had these opportunities. How are we building them, especially internally?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. You can't coach inquisitiveness. So I totally agree that that mindset and curiosity is I can't build that in a new analyst. What I can do is teach methodology, and it's not just, senior person to junior person, and I'll talk about this a little bit more when we get to my slides. It's actually making those best practices and that intuition explicit as much as you can. And that's something that we work on, through using a system like Threat Connect, because there's not enough of us to train all the people we need So you've got to find a better way.
Absolutely. Using hiring smartly, training, and making sure that you make sure that their skills correlate to what you're looking for them to do, and emboldening them with the right technology and processes. I love it, hitting all the right key areas amongst y'all. So as we sort of roll everything out, I would just, and get ready to go over to the rest of the slides from our wonderful sponsors here, I would just note to everybody in the organizations that are listening in, really a big output from the survey, a big output from the hunting summit was make a strategy and start deriving hypotheses to test out what you're wanting to do, and always make sure you can assess the effectiveness of your hunt. Really, a lot of what we're trying to do is push more automation, right? Hunting can never be fully automated, but hunting should leverage automation, and we should take all the best practices we're finding and push them down, right? Push them along the left-hand side of that sliding scale. Make sure that we're making the organizations better over time, and that is how we make it scalable. For those of you that are looking for a resource to try to figure out how to generate hypotheses, which is really the core of all hunting, coming up with a hypothesis to test and looking for something in your organization. David Bianco and I wrote a paper, linked it down the bottom, looking at the different ways you can create hypothesis generation to start driving hunts. And this is really what we want to see, folks that understand friendly as well as threat intelligence, who have some domain expertise and know situational awareness around what's going on, not just their organization, but maybe a merger and acquisition, or maybe geopolitical events going on in the world. What are these things, and how are they to drive change in our organization? So that's what I'd leave you with in terms of some opportunities to go do some cool things in organization. I would say overall, from my view of the survey, community is growing, undoubtedly growing. To have a threat hunting community that isn't just buzzwords and laden from RSA type conferences and stuff, this is awesome to start seeing real value drive to the organizations, real community forming. I mean, hunting's been around since the late 90s, so to make sure that it's that community approach backed by humans and defensible organizations, that's awesome. But remember, the focus is on the people, but it is about taking the right approach to maybe get some external help, which we'll hear about in a second, like MSSP type structure, or taking advantage of the community like we might with Threat Connect, taking advantage of understanding the malicious capabilities and technologies that are out there to help us with Malwarebytes. Lots of awesome opportunities to scale our efforts. So with that, I'd say thank you. I'm the one on the right, for those of you that didn't know the two Rob Lees apart. This was us the other week at the Threat Hunt at the SANS Orlando. Of course, taking advantage of Star Wars Celebration Day, we found Slave Leia, and she is beautiful in all of her approach and glory. So feel free to reach out to me, and with that, I'll turn it over to Mike. Take us on out.
Awesome, thanks. So at Rapid7, we were presented with a bit of an interesting conundrum when I first joined. I essentially came over with, the knowledge that was in my head and the shirt on my back, and we said, let's go do this threat hunting thing at scale. And better yet, let's do it for a bunch of companies that have never even heard of it, right? We tend to focus on small to medium. So I had an interesting problem to solve, and I wanted to share some of that with all of you, in that we were essentially starting from scratch, and we were running around saying, how do we do this? We're used to having threat feeds. We're used to having all of this external data and, the history of previous findings that would help us and empower us to effectively hunt, and we don't have that anymore. So what we really had to do is start from the basics. We had to start over as an organization and say, how do we want to approach this in an efficient and effective manner? And really what we came down to with the technology Rapid7 already had when we joined their Insight IDR user behavior analysis product, we said, okay, we know a bit about the users in the environment. How is that going to help us with our hunting? How does that give us more insight, and what else do we need? And what we ultimately determined is that we needed to pull in additional data. We needed some of that web proxy, firewall data, antivirus, as well as all of the endpoint data. So a lot of the stuff that we've spoken to earlier came in as a holistic view for us to be able to hunt effectively. And what we started doing, and this is more in an automated fashion, is actually building out where everybody lived in the environment and what they did on a day-to-day basis, and essentially started performing some anomaly detection. So looking for items like privileged accounts, not only knowing that they're privileged, but where do they routinely log on, right? So seeing if we have something that goes outside of the norm, something we want to dig in a little deeper on and do some additional hunting. and certainly what systems exist in the environment and what roles they played. And for us, that helps from a hunting perspective in terms of network communication, as well as items like processes running on the system. If I see a domain controller, obviously I don't want it going out to every domain on the internet, and I don't want to see, processes that are not otherwise focused on that role executing on the system. Is something I would want to dive into. And then where do they live, both physically and logically? So speaking to where they are in the world, what we would expect to be happening, where they would be communicating, as well as what policies would be applied to them in something like Active Directory. So logically, how do they fit into the business and how do they fit into overall policy? And then with users, same idea. Where do they live? If I see somebody logging in from Austin, Texas, and all of a sudden I see them logging in from Toronto, that's unusual. They may be traveling, but they don't typically do that. We haven't seen them travel a lot, and we know that they don't live there. And also, we know that they're in facilities. So is there a facility in Toronto that they may be visiting or not? So really getting an understanding of the overall business. And it sounds like a very large process, and it really is. With our technology, a lot of this happens for us. From an individual or enterprise perspective, this is something where you would really need to work with several teams in order to gather all of this data and categorize it effectively. Once we had all of the user data, and for each of our customers, we go through this over and over, every time we roll into a new organization, we have to identify the kind of baseline behavior for each and every user and identify what they do on a day-to-day basis. So when we're looking into an investigative lead or doing hunting based on users, we're looking for items like a primary user on a system logging into something new or somebody taking over their workstation. So if Sally logs into her PC every day, and then all of a sudden we see Bob log into her system, is Bob logging in because his system is broken and he needs to borrow one, or is it Bob doing something nefarious, or maybe it's not even Bob? So we would use that as our initial lead in our hunt and then go dig a little bit deeper to identify if we had something nefarious going on. Furthermore, if the user has several accounts, that's something that we would want to map together as well. So if it's a help desk user and they have a domain admin account and then they have a workstation admin account, we want to be able to bundle all those all together so that if we see Sally log into a system as Sally domain admin, or in some cases organization user accounts are not that clear, we already know that that's Sally, right? So we're not going to dismiss it, but it will change our degree of confidence as to whether or not it's malicious. And then knowing what that user accesses and where they came from helps us determine whether it's a benign action. When we really dig in and start doing hunting on the end, we try to pay close attention to what each of the systems do. And this is where we got into more understanding the policy and understanding the vulnerabilities and maybe lack of best practice on systems, is when we go through and we do this initial mapping and we figure out what systems live where, what they're running, and what they're supposed to be running. So understanding that a user or a system with an HTTP daemon on it is a web server is fine, but is it supposed to be a web server? Is it something that our clients are actively monitoring or hosting information on the internet, or is it something somebody's testing, or was it an adversary who spun that up so they could get in or download files? Additionally, when we go into process level hunting, we need to know what the operating systems are and what the versions are, because they do change over time, right? So if the processes are wildly different, we don't want to say, hey, that's an anomaly, if that's just because it's a Windows 10 system versus Windows 8 or Windows 7. We also need to know what applications are actively installed. And this is maybe not the sexiest part of hunting, but it is critical for us to understand whether it is a permissible application to have. And one of the things that we do with our customers is really heavily focus on administrative tools. So if we see VNC and TeamViewer and Dameware installed, we want to go to them and say, what did you put here intentionally? Where is this supposed to be? And if it's not intentional, we need to dig deeper, and we need to know now, as part of your process, that you only ever use Dameware. Furthermore, what types of data, right, as we're assessing asset criticality, and then what types of data should leave your network. This is very interesting for a lot of our customers because they're not necessarily focusing on performing hunting within outbound connections or something like network flow data, where through trending and analysis over time, the Rapid7 SOC can easily identify that we have potential data theft as we see a huge jump from a system that's never had that much outbound data. And my very favorite is going through and hunting in process data. So what we do here is we essentially gather a running list of everything that runs on a system. So, obviously our technology can do this, tools such as Sysmon can do this, but we gather all of the data and we try to identify unusual behavior or unusual patterns. So we're looking at not only what is running on each of the systems, but who is responsible for running it, how frequently it runs on that system or across the enterprise, or in our case, across all of our customers, where it runs from, and whether it's persistent. So a good example here is, once again, going back to something like TeamViewer. Across all of our network, we have one system that runs it. Across all of our customers, there's 800 systems that run it. But within this particular network, it is anomalous, and we see that the user who's running it is a domain admin, and we know the system it's running on is a domain controller, so something that we want to dig into and alert our customers to. And we also, when we first get into an environment, want to know what ran on the system. So going through and hunting through all of our historical data, like on a Windows system, looking at prefetch and app-compat and some of this other stuff, to say, okay, we want to know what you've run in the past as well, so that we can baseline that and also determine if we have anything that looks unusual or maybe malicious. We want to know, when we get into an organization, whether they've been breached in the past, and certainly that's something they want to know and why they came to us. Having that data enables us further to create more targeted threat intelligence that we can use later on in this process. Perfect.
Awesome. Turn it over to you, Tony.
Great, thank you. All right, so as mentioned, my name is Tony Gidwani. I am the Director of Research Operations at Threat Connect, and talking a little bit about how a security operations and analytics platform like Threat Connect can enable more proactive hunting. Maybe. There we go. Hunting is about taking a proactive as opposed to a reactive approach to identifying incidents. A reactive organization begins these processes in incident response when an alert or a notification comes in, and the team is really reliant on the accuracy of the notifications that it's receiving. Most teams start as reactive organizations, and that's okay. That's part of sort of knowing what normal is for you and what your own processes look like. And in many cases, the IR team is largely composed of augmentees that have other day jobs. But organizations move to becoming proactive hunting organizations when they realize that they're not detecting their incidents early enough. And so key element, which I alluded to earlier, is adopting a mindset that assumes an adversary is already present, which opens your eyes to detect key indicators of attack. And that's not just indicators of compromise. It's thinking and understanding more of the broader attack pattern that's being used that enables you to see seams in your systems a little differently. And to do this, a hunting team is going to need threat intelligence. So not every adversary is targeting your organization, but the more you have an understanding of who is targeting you and what they might be after, the more you start to move towards this proactive, intelligence-driven hunting. So a hunt team will typically be armed with known malware, again, the patterns of activity, or an understanding about these threat groups to aid them in their search. And that's both integrating external threat intelligence feeds and reports, but also, and very, very importantly, internal intelligence generated from your own networks. So understanding in this case using bidirectional integration with your SIEM so that you can see which of these indicators is actually showing up in your environment is a really crucial way to help hone in on what types of threats or threat actors are going to be relevant to you. And this is a great finding from the study that 49% of respondents are using open source third-party intelligence, and 57% are also using custom intelligence from intelligence providers. And that's so key because without threat intelligence, hunt teams are going to be shooting in the dark with limited knowledge on where to look to find likely adversaries. And again, without a way to make that threat intelligence relevant to your environment, a team's going to spend too much time and effort chasing threats and indicators that aren't relevant to their data model, threat model. So a platform not only enables you to aggregate all your threat data, but provides a location for your team to manage its processes and build its expertise. You can't take the people out of hunting. We've talked about that already. It isn't a process that can be fully automated. But without automation, those people are going to spend most of the day doing prep work, gathering, normalizing, moving data around to all the different tools your organization use in an attempt to make it actionable. So using a platform is kind of like using Blue Apron. It makes those prep steps as easy as possible. So instead of grocery shopping, chopping up all your ingredients, measuring everything, you just start cooking. So customizing threat intelligence to your environment and then using those integrations in an extensible API is like optimizing your kitchen environment to cook. Using orchestration tools is like testing, validating, and memorializing your recipes, which in this case, instead of calling them recipes, we call them playbooks. So these can be used to kick off enrichment processes for indicators or data in your environment, or for taking defensive actions. If you need a human in the loop to validate a step or to create tasks, that's not a problem. And this is one of those keys to smartly automating hunting. You're using the strength of your tools where it makes sense to leverage automation and you can establish processes, and then you're allowing your people to do things you need humans to do in order to have confidence in the outcome. So not only does this allow a team to hunt efficiently at game speed, but it also has the benefit of institutionalizing your expertise. We've all been in places that have surged in people, but seem to go backwards in effectiveness. So using these tools together, orchestration using a platform allows you to map out your best practices so your new team members can bend that learning curve faster. And when everyone on your team can understand the threat environment, leverage smart automation, and make their insights actionable, proactive threat hunting becomes the norm. And from that, I'm going to turn it over to Dana.
Hey, thank you, Tony, very much. I appreciate it. So let me go ahead and I'll take the ball here. There we go. So yeah, folks, thanks. I'm Dana Torgerson, Senior Product Marketing Manager here at Malwarebytes. And clearly with this report, it's all about time. I mean, time happens and we just have to act now. And that's really the core of what I'm going to be talking about today. And I liked looking at the data. I wanted to kind of drill down deeper into figure 2 from the published report and look at that, because this is where we can actually see insight into who is actually hunting for threats and how they're hunting, even how often they're hunting. So now at first glance, it would seem like not much has changed from 2016, but I definitely spotted some encouraging news. Although those companies who are threat hunting, they're using their own hunt methodology, it remained flat, over last year's results, I noticed. And those who are hunting with externally published hunt methodologies, it doubled. So that's really encouraging. I feel that this is great also because, sharing best practices among colleagues in our industry, that's extremely important and valuable. And the largest change that I noticed was the ad hoc hunting. That approach was actually down 7.4% from 52% over last year, but it still makes it the most prevalent method of hunting, as Robert was showing. More businesses also, they admitted that they outsourced their hunting efforts this year versus the previous year. That makes sense. You look at your capabilities, you consider what you've got, your resources, and you reach out to consultants or experts. I mean, look at Mike and his company, for instance. You offload it to them if you need help. Regardless of how they're doing it, though, folks, I'm just glad to see businesses are getting involved with threat hunting. And there's a little bit of unfortunate news here we spotted, and I think that could represent some of those folks who were shifting away from ad hoc. Maybe they've now stopped hunting and they're giving up. I hope that's not the case, but it might appear that in the fact that there was an increase of 2% in those who said, we don't threat hunt. We simply don't. So the data in the report and the survey, we also get a glimpse into how it's going, what measurable improvements businesses have made in the last year. So what I did is I looked at the relative improvements in the detection and response times reported by businesses compared to what they were saying back in 2016. So the area on the left here, this represents that first 24-hour critical period, and you'll see that clearly some strides were made in quicker threat detection. In fact, 6.4% businesses actually reported that they're detecting threats proactively in less than an hour. And we also can see a drop in the number of businesses who said it took them from 1 to 8 hours or from 8 hours to a whole day to detect threats. So that actually could show that there was a shift occurring toward that 1 hour or less detection time, which is great. And But unfortunately, more businesses on the red here, they're stating that it was taking them 72 hours to a week to detect threats proactively. And that's an increase of 5.5%. And also, when you look at the larger data, which I didn't show here, but you can see it in the report, folks, 7 businesses, that's 2% of all the companies that took the survey. Or if you look at who actually answered that they said that they actually do threat hunting, that's 4%. 4% said it takes them more than a month to a year to respond to an incident. And that's a pretty long dwell time, I'd say. And then I was looking at table 2. We saw Robert shared this as well, and it shows the threat hunting efforts. My eye was drawn to that last part, the fact that folks are not seeing improvement in the reduction of malware that they're experiencing. So apparently that pain, that critical pain that businesses have to face, that's not going away anytime soon. And I know that you can't fix stupid, and we need user security awareness training, and that's likely at play here with reinfections. And I know that the job of IR teams, doing response and containment, heck, even prevention, that could fall under different team members' shoulders than that of you dedicated threat hunters on the line here. But gosh, there's got to be a better way. I mean, especially when you consider the cost in the downtime or outages to the business or the productivity impacts, which results from all these frequent malware infections. So as Robert mentioned in the report, reactive organizations, they're beginning their incident response process when an alert or notification comes in. And it could look something like this here that I've drawn up for you folks. Here a breach occurs, and as time passes, the attacker works their way deeper into your enterprise to propagate their attack, gain escalated privileges, and so on. It's up to the security team. You got to follow your set of incident response processes or your steps to try to recover from that attack. You're going to encompass continual detection efforts. You're working with, confirmation, investigative processes, and your response actions, whether you're remediating the infected systems or simply re-imaging all those impacted systems. So we know that businesses need tools that can help create the shortest dwell time possible, while also helping you identify how far an attacker has spread and aid in your proactive hunting efforts, so that those businesses, you folks, who are lucky enough to actually have a dedicated hunting team, can use that going forward. So just imagine, if you will, the power if security teams had technologies that could deliver scheduled self-healing with threat detection and response efforts combined in an automated process, and then use indicators of compromise in your proactive hunting efforts to root out where else the attacker may be hiding. But, I say that, it's really easy to say it, but these technologies, they've got to obviously be approachable. They've got to be easy to use, because when we looked at Robert's data there, most organizations that are hunting, they, as he said, quote, they tend to be larger enterprises, quote. And you've been hit by an attack in the past, they got a target on their back. So we encourage businesses and our customers, seek out tools that can do more than just throw up an alert, but actually remediate the threat and do it immediately and do it thoroughly. And that's the kind of the best way we feel you can go forward to create the shortest possible dwell time. Okay, now I got to give you guys the company pitch. I got to get paid, right? Well, founded in 2008, Malwarebytes, we're the cybersecurity company trusted by millions around the world. Businesses and individuals, they look to us, to detect and remove threats from their desktops, their laptops and servers and mobile devices. And we're extremely effective due to our intelligence. In fact, we have the most informed threat intelligence because we see the nasty threats that, frankly, other solutions miss. We're called into action when these other bad things have happened in many cases. Plus, we see so many threats thanks to the hundreds of millions of computers that have Malwarebytes technologies running on them at any given time. So using machine-based and human-based analysis, luckily, this gives us this first true, kind of a first look at the latest threats that businesses just like yours are facing. And we take this information, to continuously improve our detection capabilities and our protection technologies. And then we utilize those technologies across all the products that we build. And you can learn more, you can go to our website, malwarebytes.com. But as I said in the beginning, folks, time happens. So definitely act now. So, thanks for the opportunity to just unpack just a small portion of this report. I encourage you to head to the website. I believe we're all hosting this, since you can get your hands on it easily, plus in the reading room at SANS. And with that, I'd like to toss it back to Robert.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. So I really appreciate everybody tuning in. We've got a couple minutes left for questions. So for any of you that haven't thrown in a question yet, feel free. We've got a couple here that I'll start queuing up to our presenters. But I'll just again say thank you to all of our sponsors that have queued in. Luckily, it's easy for me when I've got sponsors like Malwarebytes and Threat Connect and Rapid7, organizations that I'm used to dealing with anyways. I'd like to pretend that all vendors are unique snowflakes and everybody's magical, but we all know the truth. But luckily, we have some really good ones on the panel today. So I really appreciate y'all's insight. So without further ado, let's jump into some questions. So Mike, the first one I have here is for you around your approaches and what you're seeing and what data sources end up being the highest value for you. You know, what are some of those easy wins for a beginning hunt team?
For me, that comes primarily from endpoint data and determining whether you've been breached already. So going back to one of the slides I had earlier where we're looking for historical evidence of compromise, if you're in a Windows domain looking for prefetch artifacts and apt-get artifacts and running processes on your Windows systems, and similarly when you're looking at your Linux and Mac or Apple systems, identifying anything that is persistent on them, and then performing that frequency analysis or those intelligence checks on them tends to work out quite well.
Awesome. Perfect. All right. So, Dana, we got the next one for you here. You brought up training and cert, so obviously got some questions coming in on that about budgeting. You know, we've got this focus on people and training and certs and tools and technology, but you got a limited budget. What are you going to do with that limited budget? Where should we focus?
That's a great question, Robert. You know, I did give a shameless plug earlier for SANS, and I did it because I'm a fan of their mission. But apart from taking your staff, out of the hunt for a few weeks each year, I see no harm in investing in training and certifications. And that's clearly your lowest investment cost that you as a company should be making. So I think that's a no-brainer. And as I said earlier, I encourage businesses to invest in technologies, that provide improved threat visibility and detect more threats with fewer false positives, for instance, all in the aim to reduce the attack dwell time and mitigate damage. Obviously, the biggest expense here is going to be the OpEx for additional headcount. But, what is the adage? Many hands indeed can make light work, right? So if I was running a security team for business, I'd invest in my known knowns, the people I already have, then direct budget toward technologies that enable me to close gaps with my existing defenses, which could also be used flexibly in proactive hunting as well. And if my business were large enough, then I'd invest in the known unknowns, which is hiring additional people. But you can mitigate the unknown aspect if your candidates bring demonstrated experiences and certifications, like I mentioned earlier.
Awesome. No, I love that combination, just right, of people, process, and technology. Make sure it's that three-legged stool. You got to have them, and make sure we're making smart investments because everybody's got limited budgets, right? And making sure that we're getting the best value we can. Love it. All right, so we've got time for one more. Tony, I want you to carry us out. We've got this question coming in on when hunting threats, how am I supposed to know the threats that are actually relevant to my organization specifically? How do I understand to move from sort of that threat model view to understanding exactly what I'm going against and why?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's kind of the million-dollar question in this space, right? Part of it is being able to, the very first step is being able to validate that data within the context of your own organization and sensors. That gives you a starting point. Like there's not a single answer. It's not like a one-time thing that you do, right? This is a process that you're going to do over time to refine your understanding of which threats and which sources of threat information are relevant to you and your environment. Sometimes that can be pursuing information that comes from like-minded communities or within your industry vertical. I know for my team, we will tag information within the platform as being relevant to specific industries if we've seen a connection there. So there are little tricks like that. But it is sort of an unglamorous but foundational and necessary step to take the time to review what's actually hitting in your environment so you can start to hone in on what's most important.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a ton of information out there to get going. I would just, for everybody else listening in, and as we sort of wind this down, check out not only the survey, but if you go to Rapid7, if you go to Malwarebytes, go to Threat Connect's websites, you will see a lot of research. One of the reasons I like these three vending groups so much is that each of them have a very content-driven approach to marketing, where you will see, you'll see marketing documents, but you'll see a lot of actual research and content to help you out. So I would encourage everybody, check out the hunting survey. understand how your peers are doing it and what's going on in the community. That should help you drive some of the measurements you're trying to create to make sure you're driving value for your organization. If you get stuck, remember that sliding scale to try to understand where you are in your own maturity, and the hypothesis generation to make sure that you can actually start hunting correctly. Then bring in that smart technology approach or external help when you need it, and you too will have success in being the law in your organization, being that dread style hunter. So with that, I'll turn it over to Carol. Thank you so much for everybody for joining, and have a great rest of your day.
All right, well, thank you so much, Robert, Tony, Mike, and Dana for your great presentation, and to Anomaly, Domain Tools, Malwarebytes, Rapid7, Squirrel Data, and Threat Connect for sponsoring this webcast, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, you can visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.